Whispers from the hollow west. Act 1. The land speaks. They named it frontier, as if a line could tame a continent, as if chalk on a surveyor's slate could still the wind or teach the grass to kneel. They said empty, said open, said new. They were wrong. The West was never new. It was ancient and crowded, full of footfalls worn into stone, full of tracks pressed by hooves that never saw a brand, full of voices stitched into cedar smoke and river mist. I have walked it long enough to know. I am not the first here. I am only the one who stayed. I do not take a bed. I do not break bread. I keep to the margins where the road frays and the talk thins, where a man can hear the truth of a place for what it is, a ledger kept by dust. Every step writes a line, every creek crossing is an entry. Blood, too, is a kind of ink. The land remembers all of it. I have seen maps unfolded on wagon tongues, corners pinned with knives, while men argued about routes they would never live to see. Their fingers traced a safe passage through blank space, and for a moment the blankness comforted them. Blankness is a lie men tell themselves when they are tired of being afraid. Under that pale paper lay salt flats that break a horse's legs, alkali basins that split lips into bleeding petals, canyons that swallow sound. The paper never showed the wind. The wind needs no map. It knows the way. In the spring of 1952, a train of wagons left the cottonwoods on the Platte and struck west at first light. Children rode asleep against flour sacks while mothers hummed hymns they half believed. Men handled the reins like their own throats, pulling to spare, slackening to forgive. They crossed the valley the way a prayer crosses a mouth, hopeful, shaky, not heard. At dusk, they made a ring and posted watches. Coyotes sang their thin songs, and the stars came up like nails in a lid. Sometime after midnight, something moved through them. Not a raid, they would have heard the hoofs. Not a bear, they would have smelled the fat. It passed as a shadow passes, everywhere and nowhere, shapeless yet certain. In the morning, half the fires were cold, and no one could say why. They counted faces the way a gambler counts cards after a bad hand. Numbers do not lie. The missing did not come back. They hitched and went on. The wagons creaked more loudly, as if boards could voice what mouths would not. They reached the long slope that looks like promise until the sun tilts and shows its bones. Their axles buckled. Their wheels bit into sand that behaved like water, and each mile took a pound of hope to pay. The ones who made it as far as the basin lit green fire from sage twigs and cooked hard beans in kettles, black as debts. A woman stirred, stared into the steam, and saw the shape of her lost boy in it. She reached for him and burned her hand. She kept the blister hidden. Everyone hid something. I came after them, weeks or years, I do not count. I found ash circles stamped with barefoot prints too small for any soldier. I found a ribbon of blue cloth snarled in a thorn, a scent of soap stubborn as a wedding vow. Farther along, a wagon lay on its side, ribs cracked, its canvas flogged to lace by sun and grit. Inside was a Bible turned to a page that promised mercy and meant endurance instead. I closed it and left it there. A book deserves a reader. The land had already read this one. They say the earth is patient. That is wrong. The earth is exact. It does not wait. It tallies. It took the iron of spilled nails and made red soil richer. It took the fat of mules that fell under loads and fed the roots of bitter brush. It took tears and made salt pans. It took bones and made them lessons no one attended. Children who grew in towns that outlived the trail played at killing with sticks and never asked where all the ghosts stood while they laughed. The ghosts stood in the shade of their fathers' claims, quiet as men in church, and did not answer when called. North of the Raton Pass, there is a draw that drinks travelers as a cracked lip drinks water, slow, greedy, without ceremony. A stage once tried to make it by dusk, driver jerking the team to hurry night away. The lead horse stumbled on a buried root and went down screaming. The guard jumped with his shotgun, slipped, and fired both barrels into dirt. The buckshot rattled in the mesquite like hail. By the time the wheelers quit their panic, there was too much tangled leather to set right before dark. They left the horse wailing and shoved the coach by hand until the wailing stopped. In the morning they cut the harness and found the animal's eyes open and the world gone from them. A woman inside the coach crossed herself and would not step down into that soil again. She asked to be lifted over the patch where the blood had soaked. The driver obliged without mockery. Even rough men know when fear is particular. I have stood on the San Juan when it ran brown and thick, and the canyon walls said the same word to each other for 1,000 years. I have heard that word. It is not a word men use. It means here. It means exactly here. This is the work of the land, to say where a thing is, to refuse to forget that it was. A herd crossing leaves furrows, and a man crossing leaves less and thinks it means he matters more. Then a storm comes and irons everything flat, and the only trace after is the way the grass grows, a certain lean that a careful eye can read. My eye has grown careful. It has had to. Once, before the railroad drove its stakes, I watched a party of men with chains and tripods pace a straight line through a valley that curved for good reasons. They argued with the ground as if it could be talked out of itself. One of them kept coughing into a handkerchief and folding it quick so his mates would not see the stain. They made marks on stakes, numbers slapped on to explain away hill and hollow. When they were done, they hammered a brass plate into a boulder and called the job finished. The brass is green now. The boulder has not moved. The valley still curves. The coffer went into a pine box in a town whose name the line later skipped. His mates said a kind word, then took their wages and walked that straightness out of the valley and into another argument. Men quarrel with distance. Distance does not quarrel back. I have seen grass fires start with a spark from a nail in a shoe. I have watched them run like a rumor, faster than a horse, faster than a lie. Flames carry a sound with them that is not crackle but hunger made loud. One time a boy, no older than 12, stood on a rock and shouted orders at the blaze as if courage could pull a line across air. His father dragged him down and threw a wet blanket over both of them. They lived, and the field died. The next spring, the field came back meaner and greener as if to prove a point. The boy left that county at 17 and never returned. The rock kept his footprints until rain took those too. You want heroics. You want salvation. I have little of those to trade. What I have is measure. The West is a scale that never balances and refuses to break. Set a town on one side and a drought on the other, and watch the needle choose with no regard for sermons. Set a train car full of pig iron on one side and a river in flood on the other, and learn what volume means. Men write laws, water writes banks. There is a cottonwood on a bend of the Cimarron that has swallowed 3 separate bullets and 2 initials. The bark grew over the wounds because that is its way. A girl once tied a blue rag to one of its low branches and told the tree a secret. She came back as a woman to see if the rag remained. It did, faded to the color of old smoke. She smiled as if she had found proof of something. The tree did not care. Proof is for people. Trees practice fact. Sometimes at dusk I meet my own shadow standing taller than any man in the basin, and for an instant I look like a giant striding across the sage. Then the light shifts and I shrink to what I am, an outline, a reminder, a figure the horizon tolerates. It is not a trick of the eye. It is the world showing scale. A buzzard overhead will see me as a moving stitch. An ant will see me as weather. I know my place. The dead know theirs. The living pretend. I tell you now, before we go deeper, that everything which follows occurs inside this exactness. Hunger does not appear without a ledger. Violence does not happen without a witness. Even forgetting requires a place to be practiced. The basins and passes, the creek mouths and cottonwood stands, they are the shelves where memory is kept. And though men may kick the dust or curse the heat, the dust and heat are only clerks. They make no judgments. They keep hours no court could manage. They never close. When the first steel rails bit the prairie and sang under weight, I listened. The song was not triumph. It was a thin tremor, the way a deer's skin shivers before the horseflies come. Towns rose along that song like mushrooms after rain, quick, many, doomed. Saloons swung their doors wide and closed them again on mornings when there were more chairs than men to fill them. A preacher baptized 3 in a horse trough, and a week later built gallows with the same hands. A woman sold bread at dawn and laudanum at dusk. The rails carried hope in and ore out and left behind a clatter that echoes still in places with no track. The land accepted the iron because the land accepts everything. Acceptance is not blessing. Acceptance is arithmetic. I have seen the lights go out in a camp all at once and heard nothing, and I have watched one candle burn in a dugout through a night of screaming wind. The dugout roof sagged under drifted sand and rose back up at dawn as if shrugging off a bad idea. The man inside cooked coffee so weak it could not stand on its own name, then drank it with both hands as if it were a sacrament. He stepped outside, looked at the horizon as if it were a partner in a business that never paid, and nodded. He was not brave. He was precise. He knew what the day would be and consented to its terms. The land allows a man like that to continue. It is not mercy. It is fit. If you listen long enough, you will hear it. The slow talk of stone, creek, wind through grass. It does not offer comfort, and it does not take requests. It tells you what is, and if you are stubborn enough to argue, it will outlast you without once raising its voice. I have learned to keep mine low in return. I speak because silence grows heavy, not because I expect to be believed. So mark this first account as you would mark a trail tree, a bent limb showing direction, nothing more. The West is not conquered and not wild. It does not choose those words. It wears men out until they choose words for it and die with them half said. I will walk on and tell you what I see. You may call me a shadow if it helps you listen. I am not offended. Shadows are honest. They show shape without promise. The land remembers. It remembers where the wagons broke, where the axles sighed, where a mother burned her hand reaching into steam for a boy who was only a shape. It remembers the brass plate on the boulder and the cough that shook the man who set it. It remembers 6 men on one rope and the sunrise that did not hesitate. It remembers the dog's yelp and the moment after when every lamp in town leaned forward to hear what came next. What comes next is hunger. What comes next is law. What comes next is the ledger that men pretend is justice and the balance that is not theirs to hold. But before we go there, stand with me a moment longer and learn the one lesson the paper maps never taught. Nothing here is blank. Not the basin, not the ridge, not the sky that looks so bare at noon you think you could scratch your name into it with a nail. Everywhere is written already. You only need the patience to read. I have had that patience. I have had nothing else. Whispers from the Hollow West, Act 2, The Hunger of Men. Men carry their needs in their bellies, and it is their bellies that drive them westward. Not faith, not freedom, not glory, hunger. Hunger for bread, for coin, for acres, for names writ larger than their fathers. Hunger is the engine of the frontier, and it is never full. I have watched wagons break on river crossings, their drivers screaming not for their wives or their children, but for the sacks of flour swept away downstream. They dove after the bags like drowning men, lungs full of mud, eyes blind with panic. Some were pulled under by their own greed. their bones later found snagged in willow roots with fingers still clutching sodden meal. The river does not care. It takes everything at the same depth. There was a camp once, high in the Rockies, snowbound by an early storm. They set out with barrels of salted pork and kegs of beans, enough to see them through if the mountain had been merciful, but the mountain is never merciful, only exact. The barrels rotted early, the beans went hard as pebbles, and soon enough the smell of hunger hung thicker than wood smoke. They wrote prayers in their journals at first, verses copied by candlelight, hopes that God would test them only so far and then lift his hand. But the prayers dwindled as the nights grew longer, and the writing turned to arithmetic. How many mouths, how many days, how many bodies it would take to see spring. When the thaw came, hunters found their cabins half collapsed and blackened by fire. The journals lay open to pages that ended mid-word. Bones gnawed clean sat, piled in corners as orderly as kindling. The hunters buried nothing. They walked away silent and left the cabins to sink into soil. I passed there years later and found a scrap of paper in the snow, stiff with frost, a child's handwriting, a single line. Mama says not to look at the pot. Hunger makes beasts of men, but beasts have limits. Wolves gorge until they are sick, then rest. Men never rest. Their hunger spreads beyond belly to blood, to coin, to acres. The Mallory brothers, you may remember their name from another telling, were not born outlaws. They were carved that way, cut thin by famine, by a farm foreclosed, by promises salted like meat and left to spoil. They stole horses, not because they loved horses, but because they loved survival. They robbed clerks, not because they hated clerks, but because a hungry man cannot see a till without hearing his stomach howl. One winter, farther south, I saw men chew leather to keep their jaws busy while they waited for a wagon train that never arrived. They boiled strips of saddle girth until it softened, then gnawed in silence, lips cracked, eyes empty. The women kept children turned away, whispering songs about orchards they had never seen. Orchards are cruel in song, branches heavy, fruit dripping, none of it near. The children cried in sleep for apples they had never tasted, and when hunger reached its peak, it became more than gnawing. It became gospel. A preacher in a sod dugout told his flock that the desert itself was a test, that God had buried food in the dust, and only the pure of heart would find it. They knelt and sifted sand until their fingers bled, believing kernels might rise from the grit. All they found was stone, and when their preacher's body was found days later, his tongue was black and swollen, his hands clutched around a fist of sand he had sworn was grain. I have heard men sing while starving. They sang to keep the sound of their own bellies from maddening them. One sang of Virginia, another of Ireland, another of rivers that flowed wider than memory. Their voices cracked, thin reeds in the wind, but they sang until the last man faltered and the song died unfinished. The land does not keep songs, it keeps echoes, and echoes are crueler. Hunger drives out law as quick as wolves drive out lambs. In camps where food is short, justice is measured in spoonfuls. I saw one man shot in the gut for stealing half a biscuit, and another strangled for hiding jerky in his boot. The lawmen of those camps did not keep ledgers. They kept rations. They counted crumbs like coin, their stars worth nothing beside an empty pot. And yet hunger is not only famine, it is also the thirst for more, the need to own, to brand, to mark. I have seen settlers burn prairie grass just to claim the ash as theirs. They carved fences into plains where the buffalo once thundered and left them to rot when the soil blew away. Hunger whispered that land could be tamed, and they believed, though the dust rose each summer to correct them. The outlaws hungered for gold. The bankers hungered for interest. The sheriffs hungered for quiet. The railroads hungered most of all. They fed on timber and stone, on sweat and blood, and still they wanted more. They drove spikes through mountains, split rivers, and when the workers dropped from exhaustion, they fed their hunger into the ground as well. I stood on the cut once, where Chinese laborers had drilled holes in granite and filled them with powder. The blast threw rock like thunder and killed 3 men outright. The foreman marked it in his book not as death, but as progress. Progress is just another word for hunger. Men like to believe they can feed their needs and then rest. But the truth is this: hunger never ends. It grows as you feed it. It spreads from the stomach to the heart, to the hand, to the land itself. The hollow West is a testament not to courage, not to conquest, but to appetites so large they swallowed the very men who carried them. When the wagon trains vanished, when the cabins fell, when the towns emptied, the hunger did not vanish. It lingers still, like smoke in wood, waiting for breath to stir it. I hear it in the wind. I see it in the grass that leans toward old graves. I feel it in the weight of coins dropped into my palm, coins minted from ore pulled from mountains that had once stood silent and whole. You ask what drives men to such ruin. It is not evil, not malice. It is hunger. Hunger writes the story of the West in letters larger than any law. And if you listen closely, you will hear that story told in every creek that dries, every fence that rots, every prayer that dies half-voiced on a starving tongue. The hunger of men is endless, and the land, patient in its exactness, remembers every bite. Whispers from the hollow West. Act 3, The Wolves and the Law. Hunger drives men into the open, but it is law that pretends to pen them in, and between the two stands violence, plain as day, sharp as iron. They called them sheriffs, marshals, judges, men with stars hammered to their chests and ledgers on their desks. They called the others outlaws, wolves, marauders. But I tell you this, the line between them was a thread stretched taut, ready to snap in a breath. Wolves or lawmen, both fed from the same hunger, both spilled blood into the same dust. I have stood in streets where the townsfolk crowded windows, waiting to see which way the scales would tip. A sheriff facing 3 brothers with nothing but his pistol and his name. A noose swinging 6 men in a single night. The crowd chanting justice, even as their eyes showed fear. A judge who pronounced sentence at dawn and drank himself blind by dusk. The law was a theater, the stage built from gallows timber, the script written in dust and erased by wind. And yet, when the smoke cleared, when the ropes sagged, when the ledgers closed, nothing changed. The town still rotted, the hunger still howled, the land still remembered. Justice was never more than a pause between killings. I have read the sheriff's words in his ledger. No such thing. He knew the truth. That law is a mask men wear to make killing feel clean. That wolves and lawmen alike end up in the same soil, names rubbed away by storms. Now the towns are gone, the tracks rust, the gallows stand empty, but the echoes remain, the bark of pistols at noon, the creak of rope at dawn, the silence after. And I remain, a shadow, a witness, a voice carried on the wind, to remind you of what the land already knows. The West was not conquered, it was endured, for a season, for a moment. Then it waited, and it waits still.